If you've been doing photography for the last couple years, you've probably heard this question. Do you also do video? It seems like everyone is asking these days if you provide video with your photo. Can you make a recap video? Can you make an Instagram reel of the event? Can you make content for my TikTok, for my brand? Everyone wants video right now. And if you're a photographer who wasn't able to answer yes to that question, you came to the right video. Today, we're going over a crash course of all the video basics you need to understand as a photographer in 2024. By the end of this video, you will have a very basic framework of the video skills that you need to start implementing video into your photography packages. Because in my opinion, photographers are in a very lucrative position right now. We understand how to use cameras. We know the basics of composition, camera settings. It's essentially a head start. And by taking advantage of this head start, you have the opportunity to, one, grow your brand online and reach more people utilizing video, and also providing more value to your clients. And we all know when you provide more value, you make more money. So this is a win-win skill for all photographers to learn. Now, before we get into it, big shout out to our sponsor today, Squarespace. We'll talk about them a little bit later on in the video, but the first thing that we have to talk about today is the concept of shutter angle. Now, traditionally in photography, your shutter speed is determined by the situation that you're in and the image you're trying to capture. If there's a lot of motion, you typically will have a higher shutter speed because you obviously want to capture that motion. And if you're in a low light situation, you're going to drop your shutter speed to let more light into your camera. And if you're doing a long exposure to capture motion, we all know your shutter speed is going to be like 10 seconds or 30 seconds. Your shutter speed is always changing based on the situation. In video, your shutter speed is something that you don't want to change if you want motion in your footage to look normal and natural. In a movie, when you watch that movie, for the most part, all of the motion of the characters looks fluid and looks normal, and it's perceived as quote unquote how it's supposed to look. This look is achieved by having a shutter angle of 180 degrees. Now, if you are using a camera for video, you have to set your frame rate. Now, your frame rate can vary depending on the scenario you're in, but for the most part, movies and TV shows are captured in 24 frames per second. This is considered the natural frame rate that most people use. Now, if you're using a frame rate of 24 frames per second, to have a shutter angle that is proper to have that motion blur look natural, you need to have a shutter speed that is 180 degrees from your frame rate. So your shutter speed would ideally be 1/48th of a second. So if you're shooting in 24 frames per second, 1/48th of a second is going to be the shutter speed you want to use. Now, most consumer cameras that aren't video specialized will typically only go to 1/50th of a second if you're in 24 frames per second, and that is completely fine. That still achieves this same look and this 180 degree shutter angle. Now, if you're doing something like slow motion with a frame rate of, let's say, 60 frames per second, this concept of a 180 degree shutter angle still applies. You want to make sure your shutter speed is double your frame rate. So if you're shooting in 60, your shutter speed needs to be 1/20th of a second to have all your motion look natural. Now, that leads us to the second thing you have to understand, which is using a shutter speed that is 1/50th of a second and having this 180 degree shutter angle means that there are going to be a lot of scenarios where a lot of light is entering into your camera. And to overcome this, you need an ND filter. If you're getting into video and you're going to take it seriously, I definitely recommend an ND filter as something you add into your kit. Now, this leads to the third thing that I want to briefly talk about, which is a common slow motion mistake that beginner photographers make when they're learning video. If you're someone who wants to create slow motion in post-processing and you're using Adobe Premiere Pro, to create slow motion, this is what you want to do. You want to change your frame rate in your camera. Let's say you normally shoot in 24 frames per second. You want to change it to whatever slow motion frame rate you want. Let's say for this example, we're going to shoot in 60 frames per second. If you capture your video at 60 frames per second with a shutter speed at 180 degrees, so a shutter speed of 120, when you bring that video into post, rather than hitting speed and trying to slow down the video, which is a mistake a lot of people make, you want to make sure that your sequence is set to 24 frames per second, and then you want to right click on that clip and you want to go to modify and you want to change the frame rate from the 60 to 24 frames per second. This was a mistake I made for a long time. I've seen a lot of other people make this mistake when they're learning video, so I hope that saves you a little bit of trial and error. Now, that leads to the fourth thing we have to talk about, which is a very basic understanding of log footage. Now, in photography, we all know that if we make a raw file with our camera, typically in post is where we will take advantage of the dynamic range of our sensor. We can raise our shadows, we can drop our highlights, we can change our exposure, we can bring down our contrast to get this nice flat image that has a really good balance between our highlights and shadows. This in video does not exist, but the way you overcome this is by using log. Log is a very flat picture profile that essentially allows you to manipulate all parts of the image because all of the data is captured. So you can have clean highlights as well as clean shadows, and then in post you're able to adjust all these things and bring the image to the look that you want. It's essentially the exact opposite of photography. In photography, you have this very contrasty raw file that you will manipulate to get the dynamic range where you want, whereas in video, you have this very flat image that you have to manipulate to get to the contrasty image that you want afterwards. Now, I would say the biggest beginner mistake that I see with people using log footage is they rely on the flatness of the log footage as basically a fail-safe that they can take advantage of in editing. Rather than paying attention to the exposure of the log footage when they're out shooting, they think, oh, I'll just be able to manipulate this and fix it later. But that is not the reality of log footage, and it's going to make your life much more challenging if you don't pay attention to your exposure. Making sure that your exposure is balanced properly in camera is the key to making log footage easy and usable, especially as a beginner. Now, speaking of log footage, that leads us to the fifth thing I want to talk about, which is the very basics of color grading. Now, the most important thing we have to talk about with color grading is this concept of Rec. 709 conversion. Now, with any camera that you're using, the manufacturer of that camera will most likely have a LUT that you can apply to your video that will change that video from log to Rec. 709. Now, I'm not going to try to get into a full breakdown of what Rec. 709 is because I'm by no means an expert on the technical aspects of it, but basically Rec. 709 is a color space that is readable by most devices and most screens. So if you're creating a video that's going to be viewed on a television or a computer or a phone screen, Rec. 709 is a color space that will work with all those devices. That is Rec. 709 in a nutshell, but it's important to understand that every camera has a different Rec. 709 conversion LUT, and based on what codecs you're using in your camera, this conversion could look different. Sony cameras will look different than Nikon, Nikon will look different than Lumix, Leica is different than Lumix, they are all different. So it's important to go out and find the proper Rec. 709 conversion for the log footage that you're using. But once that Rec. 709 conversion is applied to your footage, you will see the benefits to shooting in log. You will see that your highlights and shadows are now both exposed and balanced, and you're getting all of the data in your scene, and you're getting more of that movie style look. Your highlights aren't blown out, your shadows aren't too dark, everything looks balanced because you have all the data from that log video. Now, real quick, one honorable mention for a video skill that photographers might want to learn in 2024 is how to apply captions and paste Instagram Reels and create social media content for their own brand. And later this month, probably a couple days after this video comes out, I am going to release a free course on my website where I explain how I make my Instagram Reels for my photo page, Evan Ramp Photo. So if you want to get that, you can go to the link in the description on today's video, download my free Instagram mindset guide, and when that is live, I will send it out to everyone on that mailing list. And that free course would not be possible without today's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is hands down the biggest part of my photography business because they allow me to, one, do really cool things like provide free information to y'all with something like a course, but they also allow me to contact people directly with their email marketing tools, and they also allow me to sell my products like my photo books and my presets. Squarespace is an all-in-one solution for photographers out there looking to take their business to the next level. Squarespace offers things like scheduling, they offer things like membership sites, they offer things like courses, which I already mentioned. They allow you to have clients contact you through a contact me page, and on top of that, Squarespace has made it easier than ever to customize your site with Fluid Engine. With Fluid Engine, you can just drag and drop elements of your website on a template with this grid system that they've developed, and the best part is you can create a custom look with no web design experience, and you can also customize your mobile site separately using Fluid Engine. So if you want to try out Squarespace, implement any of these tools into your business, you can go to squarespace.com/EvanRamp to start a free trial and use code EvanRamp to save 10% when you're ready to check out. That's squarespace.com/EvanRamp to start a free trial, and when you're ready to send your site live or purchase your first domain, use code EvanRamp to save 10%. Big thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. So number 6 on this list is understanding how different shots convey different messages. Now, this is something that is a little bit more advanced, but I just want to go over the basics in today's video because in photography, we typically think in terms of ultra wide, wide, macro, portrait. That's our objective, is doing one of those things. Now, in video, because a video is a sequence of different, essentially moving images, we can convey our story in a much better way because we can change our shots and our focal lengths along the duration of that sequence. Now, when it comes to film, there are a variety of different shots, but the two that I find to be the most important is understanding the concept of an establishing shot and the concept of a close-up shot and what the two do together. So typically an establishing shot is going to be a shot that sets the scene. So let's say I'm filming a sequence of me working on the computer. An establishing shot of that sequence would be a wide angle view of my office, and it would probably be me walking towards the computer and sitting down. This scene lets the viewer know where they are. And from here, you can start utilizing more close-up shots. These close-up shots are where you can convey emotion, you can convey details, you can convey story. So that would be the scene of me typing on my computer or me staring at the screen. These close-ups make sense when the establishing shot is present. Now moving on, that leads to the seventh thing that photographers need to understand, which is the concept of motion continuity in your video. Now, if you have a subject moving through your video, let's say they're going from the left side of the frame to the right side of the frame, and the following shot is going to be a panning shot where you're following the subject, you want to make sure that your motion that was conveyed by your character moving from left to right is also conveyed in the motion of your pan. So you want to pan left to right rather than going right to left. That would oppose the motion of your scene and essentially create this visual disturbance. The viewer is expecting their eyes to go this way, and then all of a sudden they're going back this way, where they can just follow the scene fluidly if you pay attention to that motion and that continuity. So that right there is everything I want to talk about today. Those are all the video basics photographers can learn in 2024. Video is something I highly recommend every photographer at least explore this year, maybe start adding some skills into your repertoire, because video allows you to provide more value to people. If you're someone growing a brand on social media, maybe you're trying to get your photography in front of more people, video allows you to give more value to that potential audience. And in return for that value, you get more opportunities because you have a larger audience. And if you're looking to work with more clients, you're looking to make more money in your business, having video skills allows you to give more to that business. So that business can make more money with the value you provide, and in exchange for that value, you can also make more money. So learning video is a win for everyone. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, photographers have a clear, distinctive advantage when it comes to learning video because you already understand a camera, you already have the equipment. It's all about just putting all the pieces together and being willing to learn something new. So if this video helped you out, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe if you are not yet, and I'll catch y'all in the next one.